So last year I took a class in seminary on disability theology, and it was amazing. It was particularly relevant after my stroke, because even though the stroke hasn't had long-lasting effects, at least from what me and my doctors can tell, it's still, while I was in the hospital, it was still making me think about like health, disability, and the ways in which I haven't really focused on disability in my theology. I focused, on queerness, feminism, racial justice, but until I was in the hospital for 5 days, wondering what the aftermath of the stroke would be, I just never thought about disability, which is, shameful to admit. So a few months after my stroke is when I took the disability theology class, and it was an intensive class, which meant we had class for a few days. I can't remember how many days, from like 9 to 5. And I love those classes, but they're very intense. But one thing that the class had me thinking about was our images of God and our images of Jesus, and how those images often reinforce societal norms and what we value. And so some of the reading talked about the idea of a disabled God, and there's a book, I think by Nancy Easland, I think is how you say it, Easland, called The Disabled God. And so what that book and that class question is, how do our images of God impact our theology? And what would it mean if we viewed God as disabled? For instance, Easland, I don't know how to pronounce your name, mentions that Jesus, when he's resurrected, shows himself to the disciples, and he still has the wounds. And that the crucifixion was a disabling event. So what would it mean if we took seriously Jesus being disabled / God being disabled? And for me, the idea of God being disabled fits in with other liberation theologies, which, although they're different, queer liberation theology, womanist liberation theology, mujerista liberation theology, they're all a bit different because they all focus on the experiences of different people. But at the heart of all these different liberation theologies is the idea of God being with the marginalized and with the vulnerable. And so the image of God as disabled is reinforcing that God is with the marginalized, because as enlightened as some countries like the United States likes to think it is, it still treats disability horrific. I've only had a tiny bit experience after a health scare, and it's nothing compared to what disabled people go through on a daily basis, and the rejection and the harm that larger society imposes. Also, what the idea of God as disabled has shown me is that disability theology shouldn't just be like an afterthought. So much of the discussion in churches, at least, is about accommodation, which is super important, but it's accommodation after the fact. Like, we're doing this thing, we should be inclusive. How do we accommodate people? But what disability theology is saying, and specifically the image of God as disabled is saying, is that no, disability should not just be an extra thing to be considered. It should be central. It should be central to how we view the world and to how we interact with each other and to how we understand God. To me, it's similar to other liberation theologies. Like, for me, queerness and feminism and racial justice are not abstract concerns or theological matters that come after the fact. They're central to my theology. In a similar way, so should disability theology be central to how we understand God and how we understand each other. So anyway, that class and disability theology is making me just reconsider how I understand God and the assumptions I make and the ways in which my theology has been harmful towards people with disabilities, and how I can and should do better, and how the church, to be frank, can and should be doing better.